Welcome. My name is David McCoy. Today's class is an orientation. Our orientation gives a general overview of the foster care system. It also introduces to prospective applicants the general process to become a resource parent, as well as an introduction to the types of children that we deal with in foster care. The orientation will provide you with a general overview of the components to be authorized to serve as a resource parent. Thank you. How's everybody doing? Good. My name is David McCoy, and I am the administrator and co-owner of a coming of age foster family agency. You guys are here because you're interested in wanting to learn information about how to become a resource parent, or formerly known as a foster parent. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. So today's class is an orientation class. What an orientation class does is it gives you a general overview of the foster care system. It explains to you the process by which to become a foster parent, also known as a resource family or a resource parent. And it gives you some insight into the types of kids that we deal with, the types of behaviors that we deal with, and educates you a little bit more about understanding what the foster care system is about. So that's kind of what we're gonna do, or that's what we're gonna hope to accomplish. A little bit of background about myself. My name is David McCoy. I am the administrator and co-owner of a coming of age foster family agency. I've been a social worker now for about 24 years. I started off after I graduated from college. I started working at Child Protective Services for Riverside County. I worked there for about 5.5, 6 years, and then went into private foster care. Started my own agency, had other partners, had a different agency before this agency, never get into business with partners. Ended up developing this organization about 13 years ago with my wife. So together we are the directors of a coming of age foster family agency. Okay, enough about me. You guys are here because you want information about how to become a foster parent. So as a result, I wanted to first say, you each have a packet, is that correct? Okay, so in this packet is going to be some information that we're going to go through, okay? We're going to talk about the information that's in this packet. I'm going to explain some things to you. We're also going to eventually watch a little bit of a video as part of today's class. Typically, our orientation class lasts about 2 hours, okay? So my goal is to get you out of here within that 2-hour time frame. However, I will say this up front. If you have a question, ask it. I am here to give you information, but more importantly, I'm here to answer any questions that you guys may have. Okay, and then hopefully you guys will decide to come back tomorrow and every week thereafter and go through the full program. Okay, so having said that, I want to kind of look at this packet. And you'll literally see in this packet kind of explains not only the process by which to become a resource parent, but it kind of explains and gives you some information just in general about foster care. So one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of take you through this packet first, and then we'll come back through specifically and start looking at different aspects of this packet, okay? So what you end up having is the very first page, you have a general overview information, and it starts to give you some definitions about foster care. We like to give you that information because in foster care, you're gonna hear a whole bunch of acronyms, you're gonna hear a lot of different terminologies, and so this kind of gives you something to walk away with and have as understanding of those terminologies and aspects of foster care. On page 2, it goes into completing more of the definitions of foster care. And then on page 3, beginning on page 3, it starts to answer some commonly asked questions about foster care. So what we find is that people, a lot of times they have questions, but they may not want to ask those questions. And so as a result, we already identify some very commonly asked questions and give you some information and answers that'll help you as you decide if this is something you want to pursue. Okay, page 4 finishes with the commonly asked questions. We find that there's basically about 10 questions that are very common to be asked, so we try to answer those 10 questions right off the top. Next page of the packet gives you our class schedule. Okay, this explains the general process, because what you're gonna hear and what we'll talk about a little bit more deep, or a little bit more in depth, I should say, is that foster care, to become a resource parent with our agency, it's basically you're gonna commit to a 6-week training cycle. Okay, so we have 1 orientation class, but then we have 10 training classes. And so this gives you that information about those training classes over the course of the next 6 weeks. okay? And we'll come back and explain all that. So, having said that, at the same time, one of the things that you'll also notice is that you're gonna have some information about, you're gonna be taught information about how foster care has changed. And that's actually what I'm gonna start with when I actually start answering some questions. In this packet, you're also gonna see a chart that talks about the whole resource family approval, the components, and the general process, so that by the time you leave out of this training class today, you'll have a full understanding of the process of becoming a resource parent, okay? So, having said all that, following that page then goes into explaining each of those individual components. So we'll kind of get into all of that in more detail, but let me kind of start off by acknowledging how foster care has changed, okay? And I'm gonna talk from the past to the present. So, foster care has actually changed quite significantly, and the change took effect January 1st, 2017. What ended up happening is, let's go back in time, and let's say that you guys were interested in becoming a resource parent or a foster parent prior to January 1st, 2017. So let's say that 3 years ago, you expressed an interest to become a resource parent or a foster parent. I'm gonna explain using each of you as an example. So I'm gonna call on you, I'm gonna call on you, I'm gonna call on you to help me out, okay? And I'm gonna use each of you individually. So let's say you were interested in being a foster parent, and you happen to be walking through the mall, and you came across an agency called a Coming of Age. And the agency talked about become a resource parent or become a foster parent, help serve the needs of kids. And so you walked in and you decided to inquire about how do you become a foster parent. What would end up happening prior to January 1st, 2017 is that you would go through basically a 5-step process. You would start by attending training classes and orientation and training classes. You would complete an application. You would have your home inspected. After that home inspection, you would have an interview. And then you would have the county give the final okay that they would allow kids to be placed in your home. Now, to become a foster parent through an agency such as a Coming of Age, you would have been referred to as a certified foster parent. Now, what's a certified foster parent? It's a foster parent. It's somebody who's taking care of other people's kids who are in out-of-home placement. However, you are affiliated with a private nonprofit corporation or an organization that's contracted with a county CPS office. So all certified foster parents would end up being associated to a private organization that in and of itself was contracted with local Child Protective Services offices. That would be what's called a certified foster parent. Now, if I can use you for an example. What's your name by any? Myra? Okay, and what's your name, sir? Daryl. Okay, Daryl, and what's your name? Luis. So Myra, you decided to also, let's say you were driving down the freeway 3 years ago and you saw on the freeway a sign that said, Child Protective Services needs you to serve the needs of adjudicated or abused and neglected kids. And on that signage, there's a telephone number, and you would call that telephone number and you would be directed to your local Child Protective Services office. So let's say we're here in the city of Moreno Valley, so you call that number and it directed you to Riverside County Child Protective Services. Riverside County Child Protective Services would explain to you that you need to call a certain organization called Community Care Licensing. They would host an orientation class and they would provide you with information, and you would also undergo basically a 4-step process. 4-step process is 1, attending orientation and training classes. 2nd process is filling out an application material. 3rd process is having your home inspected. 4th process is also having an interview and being approved. Now, unlike Daryl, Myra, when you complete everything, you are not associated to a private organization. You are working directly for the county. So whereas Daryl is referred to as a certified foster parent, you would be referred to as a licensed foster parent. Now, what's the difference between a certified parent and a licensed foster parent? A couple of things. Certified foster parent is associated to a private nonprofit organization that's contracted with Child Protective Services. However, you would be a licensed foster parent. And as a licensed foster parent, you work directly for Riverside County Child Protective Services. Now, just like a certified foster parent, you as a licensed foster parent can get a call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, be given information about a child, whereby you make an independent decision as to whether or not you want to accept that child. Any county social worker who works for that county that you live in and that you are licensed by can call you up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, give you information about a child, and you independently as a licensed foster parent make the decision to accept that child. A certified foster parent from the past could not independently make the decision to accept the child. Why? Because you work directly for the county as a licensed foster parent. You work through an agency. So when a placement call comes to you as a certified parent, you have to still work with your agency who will do its own intake to decide whether or not that child is appropriate for your home. A licensed foster parent is also issued your own individual license. It's in your name. It's literally associated just to you, whereas a certified foster parent was not issued an individual license. You were issued a certificate of approval that was associated to the agency that represented you. So there were pros and cons, but one route, certified parent through an agency, a different route, licensed foster parent directly by the county. Okay, both of you can accept kids. Both of you can be called by any county social worker. The only big difference, a licensed foster parent individually makes the decision, whereas a certified foster parent has to communicate with the agency that is representing them. Okay, so again, tell me your name, sir.
Luis.
Luis. Okay, so Luis, you're gonna be a third type of caregiver from our past. You, let's say, have a brother. I don't know if you do, but let's just say you do. All right, and Luis, your brother happens to be in a relationship where he has a relationship and they together have children. But your brother gets into an argument with his wife, whereby that argument gets loud, it gets physical, and a neighbor happens to hear all of that commotion. And what does that neighbor do? They call the local police to make sure that everything in that household is okay. When the police come out, they knock on the door, they can hear arguing, your brother opens the door, he sees two police officers, and what do those police officers see? They see your brother and his wife, both with scratches, scratch marks, dishes are thrown, the house in and of itself is kind of a mess. What do those police officers then need to do? They need to assess the situation, investigate what's going on, and when they start talking individually to your brother and to his wife, they begin to notice marks on both of them. So what do they immediately look at? Domestic violence. Unfortunately, what ends up happening? When they look at both your brother and his wife end up acknowledging, yeah, we were arguing, it wasn't a big deal, but because those officers have now seen marks, let's say hypothetically, they arrest both parents. What are they then gonna do? They're gonna call Child Protective Services. They're gonna call Child Protective Services because your brother and his wife have two little kids. Child Protective Services is gonna come to the home. Now, depending on the social worker who comes to the home, that social worker is going to talk with your brother and his wife. And they're going to inquire if there's any other relatives that can potentially take care of those kids. Now, of course, your brother acknowledges, I don't want my child going into a foster home with a stranger. I don't want my child going into a licensed foster home or a certified foster parent because I don't know these people. But I have a brother and I want my children to go with my brother. And just so happens that that county social worker happens to call you, talks to you. It doesn't go into the details, but explains there's a situation. Unfortunately, CPS is now involved in the life of those two relatives, two children, and acknowledges that because of some issues going on, the parents, unfortunately, are going to have to be arrested and detained for a little bit. but they call you to inquire if you are interested in taking care of your two, let's say, nephews. And so as a result, what ends up happening is Child Protective Services has the ability to do some background checks on you. They'll check your home, they'll talk to you, but they make the decision that yes, your background is clear, and they can place those kids in your home, and they find that your home, after going and checking your home that night, is sufficient to meet the needs of those two nephews. So what do? They look to place those kids in your home. Well, prior to January 1st, 2017, that was referred to as kinship care. That was a circumstance where you have relative kids of an individual who are in foster care, but who are living with a relative. And as a result, kinship care was another form of out-of-home placement. The only difference is, unlike the certified parent or the licensed foster parent, you weren't trying to take care of other people's children who are strangers. You are focused only on taking care of your relatives. So CPS acknowledges that there are certain things you have to do, but you don't have to do training classes. You don't have to do all of the things that a certified parent or that a licensed parent has to do. Why? Because you're not taking care of everybody else's child who happens to be in foster care. You were only focused in on taking care of your relatives. Kinship care, licensed foster parents, certified foster parents are all different types of providers who could take care of children who were in the foster care system. A kinship provider was still taking care of your family, but your family members were still in the care of CPS. A licensed foster parent would take care of anybody's child who was a dependent of CPS living in that county that you resided in. A certified foster parent, again, was a person who was taking care of other people's kids, not relatives, who were in foster care. So these are three different types of providers for kids who are in foster care. There was also a fourth type of a provider referred to as a non-related extended family member, or what's called a NRFM provider. That's when you had, for example, let's say I have a best friend, not blood relative, but my best friend's kids go into foster care. And my best friend's kids end up in foster care, and that person has no family members around. And so CPS looks at me to take care of my best friend's kids. Again, because I'm not related, but I'm giving that extended family member status, they were referred to as a NRFM provider. So there was different types of providers who could take care of children in foster care. January 1st, 2017, all of that changed. And that's where the process of resource family approval came into play. Because under resource family approval, everybody who could provide care for a child, be it a kinship or a relative caregiver, be it a licensed foster parent, be it a certified foster parent, everybody who had different processes to become an out-of-home care provider now has only one process. Because under resource family approval, you could take care of a relative. You could take care of someone else's kid. You could take care of your best friend's kid. It didn't matter because the process is the same. It's not a 5-step process for a certified parent versus a 4-step process for a licensed foster parent versus a different process for a kinship provider. It's one process for everybody. And when you're approved as a resource parent, it doesn't matter what type of child, relative, not related to you, or what have you, you are authorized upon being approved as a resource parent or a resource family to take care of any child in foster care that's referred to you. Does everybody understand that? And that was a major change of how foster care changed effective this year, 2017. Because what ended up happening is the state recognized there's too many different processes for people who want to help take care of family members or not. There's too many different processes. So what they developed was one standard process by which everybody who is taking care of a child in foster care will undergo. Question.
Just real quick, since there's one step now, or one process, say for instance, the relative, where would those kids go in the process of him, or in the meantime while he's getting all the...
So here's the unique thing about resource family approval, this whole process. Under emergency circumstances, if you had a relative, let's say you had two nephews who you were going through this process. While you're going through this process, there are certain conditions by which Child Protective Services, in certain specific cases, could place a child in your home under an emergency status while you're finishing up this process. Now, what does that apply to? Typically, relative placements, okay? To take care of somebody else's child, CPS isn't gonna just place a stranger child in your home. But if you ended up having a circumstance where it was a relative of yours and you are in the process of going through these steps with an organization or with the county directly, they have the ability, under limited circumstances, to place the child in your home while you're going through this process, okay? And that was because the number one focus of resource family approval process was to look at, one, permanency of children. Secondly, more importantly, reunification, if at all possible, with the biological parents. But it used to be that the number one goal of CPS was reunification, to give the biological parents the opportunity to get their kids back. The focus has since shifted to look at permanency. What is in the best long-term interest of a child? And that's why under resource family approval process, when we get to the components, I'm going to explain that every resource parent who looks to become a resource care or resource family will be asked about what is your level of permanency, meaning, are you potentially looking to find a child that you want to adopt? Are you potentially looking at finding a child who, you know what, I'm not willing to adopt, but I am willing to take legal guardianship over? You, on the other hand, may turn around and say, you know what, I've got 3 of my own kids. And so as a result, I'm not really interested in adopting a child or taking legal guardianship, but what I am willing to do is take care of a kid for as long as possible until someone else who might be interested in adopting that child is willing to take adoption over that child. So the goal under resource family approval process was to look at and ascertain right off the bat while you're going through this process, 1, what's your ultimate commitment to a child? 2, what is your desire in terms of becoming a resource parent? Why are you doing it? And then 3, supporting these kids as they are undergoing the process of being put into foster care. Any other questions that you guys have? Okay, so that kind of explains how foster care has changed from before till now. One process, regardless of what type of a commitment you want to make to a child. Having said that, one of the things that ends up happening, and this is where I want to kind of point to our packet that starts with this. You can think of the process to become a resource family or a resource parent as a 5-step process, okay? But those 5 steps incorporate 8 components to be approved or rejected as to serve as a resource parent. Now, you hear me use the term resource parent, okay? It used to be called foster parent, okay? That was the name that we all hear as to, I want to be a foster parent. Well, January 1st, 2017, the term foster parent changed. And so as a result, do you guys see this in your packets, this page? So as a result, under this RFA process or resource family approval process, the term foster parent changed to resource parent or resource family. Now, what I want to kind of do is I want to introduce you to the general steps or components that it takes to become a resource parent. Before I go into these individual components, I want to remind you, think of it as 5 steps. Okay, step number 1, attending orientation and training classes. Step number 2, completing the application. Step number 3, having your home inspected. Step number 4, undergoing interviews. And then step number 5, the county giving the authorization for kids to be placed in your home. Okay, so in a broad sense, 5 steps to be a foster, or I did it again, foster parent, to be a resource parent. 5 steps. But let's look at the individual components that make up those 5 steps, okay? So this diagram explains the general process by going through and explaining each of the different components that are incorporated into those 5 steps. So as you can see, in order to be a resource parent or to be approved as a resource parent, it starts with attending the training classes. Now, the state mandates that all resource parents receive a minimum of 12 hours of training. Now, I want to be upfront with you. There's no way you can be effective to serve the needs of these kids by only receiving 12 hours. So, that is one of the reasons why, as an organization, our organization has more or a higher standard than just that minimum requirement of 12 classes. Our process is 1 orientation class, 10 training classes. This will then be a total of 33 hours of training. Now, there is some additional training depending on if you become a more higher specialized type of resource family that serves a specialty population of youth referred to as intensive services foster care youth, which we'll get into later. But to become a resource parent, 1 orientation class, which is what you guys are all doing today, followed by 10 total training classes. Now, our training classes always occur on Monday and Tuesday evenings. And that's why you'll see how the schedule is in your packet when it breaks down the actual classes that are identified for this series of classes. The schedule in and of itself is the orientation. Our class number 1, 2, and 3 are referred to as our pre-certification classes. So those first 4 classes, orientation, class 1, class 2, class 3, make up the first 4 classes. And those first 4 classes are referred to as pre-certification classes. That's where you will get a general overview of certain standards that the state requires. Remember I said that the state requires 12 initial hours? Well, in those first 4 classes, that's where you get those first 12 hours. We cover all of the topics that the state mandates out of those 12 hours. But then classes 4 through 10 expand on that and begin to look at other aspects of foster care. It starts to get into specialty populations of kids, types of behavior, mental health issues, drug usage, trauma-informed parenting, and You'll hear that term throughout all of the training classes, because one of the biggest challenges for a resource parent is understanding the trauma that these kids undergo. And so we'll talk about that trauma today. Having said that, training classes, total 11 classes. That's one component. You'll also see that component number 2 is the application materials. Now, because today's class is an orientation, we do not provide out applications, because what we want people to do is digest what you've heard. Because you may turn around and say, you know what, based on everything I've heard, thank you for the information, David, it was enjoyable, but guess what? This just is not for me right now. And there's nothing wrong with that. Because at the end of the day, the goal is to provide you with information so that you make the decision as to whether or not the time is now for you to pursue this. At the same time, we will start passing out applications in class number 1, which starts tomorrow. If you decide to come back, you will then get the initial applications that resource families must start working on, because the application materials is component 2. Okay? Component 3, as part of those applications, you are going to do certain background checks. Now, the background checks are oftentimes referred to as live scan. Has anybody heard that terminology before? Okay? Has anybody ever been live scanned before? Okay, so here's one thing. Before you leave today, I'm gonna give you guys a business card of one of my employees. Her name is Clara Garcia. You may have spoken to her because she may have been the person who signed you up for today's class. Clara is our prospective parent coordinator. She is the person who works with all of our initial applicants. If you've ever had a live scan before, you are going to want to talk with Clara. And here's the reason being. Depending on the field that you work in, everybody hears the term live scan. However, live scans done in certain fields will automatically enable us to transfer those live scans. Nope, I said that wrong. I apologize. It just hit me as it was coming out of my mouth that that's the wrong information. That used to be the case. Under resource family approval, everybody who has done a live scan before must still undergo a new live scan. However, if you've done a live scan before, we still want you to let Clara know, because what she's going to do is she's going to call and verify with the state that you had live scan clearances with the state. So let me explain something. I used to work for Child Protective Services. I did live scans through Child Protective Services, but Child Protective Services, the county, was my employer. When I went into a private foster care agency, the county would not release my live scan clearances to the state. So I had to then turn around and redo live scan clearances. I had did them before. I knew that they were clear, but because the county would not release it to the state, that is why I had to redo it. So let's say, for example, let's say you worked in a group home. The state, community care licensing, would have your live scans in their system. The problem is now that resource family approval process has been initiated, you still have to redo your live scan clearances. But our agency wants to call in and verify that your old live scans are on file with the state, because that way when we do your new live scans, we're going to start tracking it based on knowing that you were already had a live scan on file with the state before. If, however, and I'm going to use you for an example if you don't mind, you did a live scan, let's say, if you don't mind me asking, what type of work do you do? What type of work?
8 in the morning.
No, I'm sorry, yeah, like what field of work do you work in?
I'm paying houses.
Got you. So You're a painter. You may have had life scan done before to make sure that as you're going into other people's houses and things like that, your company that you work for can say, all of our employees have background checks. Unfortunately, let's say you did that before, but the company that you worked for did not release it to the state community care licensing. Even though you've done it, it may not be in the state system. And so as a result, when we have you redo your clearances again, now we know you're not in the state system. So now we're actively looking out for your clearances so that we can let you know as soon as possible, hey, everything is good to go, or we received your clearances. Whereas somebody who's done it before, we know they're in the state system, so we're looking to see if we get those a little bit quicker. Does everybody understand that? Okay, so background checks are part of the process. They, in your application materials, will be the documents that you need to go do your background checks. The unfortunate thing, the background checks have to be done on every adult living in your home. If you have an 18-year-old, a 20-year-old, if your mother lives in your home, every individual 18 and above has to have a live scan. And your applications will not be approved without our agency confirming that every adult in your home has a background check on file with our agency. The paperwork that's in the applications, we ask that you use our paperwork when you do your background checks. And the reason that we ask for that is because we need for your clearances to come back to our agency. And the only way your clearances will come back to our organization is if you're using our paperwork, okay? So make sure that in your application, when you get the paperwork to do your live scan, you're using our paperwork. Okay? And in that application packet, when it comes to your background checks, there will be paperwork that tells you where you can go to get your live scans done. Okay? So that there's no surprises. Number 4, component number 4. Component number 4 is home environment assessments. The home environment assessments basically acknowledges that is referred to, or that is called, a home inspection. In order for our organization to approve your home as a resource family, we have to inspect your homes. You will see in the paperwork where it lists the dates of all of the training classes, you will see that after class number 3, there is a break where the week of October 30th, it says home environment assessments begin. That is the week that if you decide to come back and start this process, once you start turning in paperwork, we will actually start doing home inspections while you're in your training classes. The reason we do it that way is if you guys are motivated and you're excited and you want to become a resource parent and you've got your application, you're turning in paperwork, that helps us to know you're excited. And guess what? We love excited resource families. And as a result, what we want to do is we want to start inspecting your home so that we can check off that box of one of those components being done before this gentleman. Because he may be excited, but guess what? He's not turning in paperwork. And so as a result, we're not going to schedule your home inspection or your home environment assessment that particular week, because we only schedule these inspections, the initial inspections, based on who's turning in paperwork. At the end of the whole training program, we will automatically start scheduling appointments to do home inspections. But for those that are excited, that want to start turning in paperwork and showing that, hey, I'm interested in doing this, we want to start that process as early as possible. Okay? So the home environment assessment is an inspection of your home. Now, I want to be upfront with you. Not every home passes on the first time. Don't worry about that. Okay? The reality is that there are a lot of things that the state wants to look at. Homes have to have fire extinguishers, and they have to be of a certain type. Homes have to have screens on all the windows, and there's other aspects that we look for. And so as a result, one of the things that we will do is if we go out and do a home environment assessment and determine that, you know what, there's some follow-up that needs to be done. We're gonna just schedule a second follow-up appointment at your convenience, and then we're gonna come out and do it at that time. We work with you to get the homes approved. However, if a home just cannot meet the state's requirements, we're gonna let you know that early on. So that way, your time isn't being wasted.
What are an example of some of the things that completely doesn't allow you to pass a home inspection?
Well, so I'll give you an example. Excellent question. I did a training class. We went out to a home, and at that home, we had a mother who had her adult daughter living in the home. There was a sofa in the home, no beds, and no other furniture other than blow-up bed. But they wanted 2 kids plus an infant. No other furniture in the home. No cribs, bedrooms were pretty empty, and in the living room was a sofa. And they said that they were ready for a home inspection. That's not gonna pass, okay? So what are typical things that we look for? A nice home. Has appropriate furnishings for the kids as well as appropriate furnishings for yourself. It looks in nice general order. Has food there. If we go out to a home and there's no food in the home, what are the kids gonna eat? I'm not gonna place kids in a home where there's no food there. So you can think of it as and I always use this example. If your kids, unfortunately, ended up in foster care, what type of a home environment would you want to see your kids living in? Sorry to say. That's kind of what we look for. We're not expecting that every foster parent or every resource family's home be a 3-story mansion with 8,000 square feet, okay? What we want to see is a nice, comfortable family environment, which has a nice yard, which has welcoming things for the kids, and which presents as a nice family environment, okay? So hopefully that kind of gives you a visual to keep in mind. Okay. Another component, number 5, it's called a risk assessment. As part of going out to your home, as part of interviewing and talking with you, one of the things we look for and that we identify are certain risks. So we're going to ask you questions such as, are there any medical concerns that you have that we need to be made aware of? For example, if you've been told you got 6 months to live, heaven forbid, that's a major risk because what happens if we place kids in your home and then 2 weeks later you've passed? We'll also ask for questions related to some particular problems that you may be dealing with, mental or emotional. We look at medications that a person may be taking. So a risk assessment asks different questions related to our ability to ensure that you are well to take care of these kids, okay? And it's literally a document that we have a conversation about. When we are doing these components, majority of it is based on an interaction. Yes, you'll see us with paperwork and you'll see us checking off certain things. But at the end of the day, I'm going to have a conversation with you. I'm going to have a conversation with you. I'm going to have a conversation with you. Because at the end of the day, what I'm assessing is whether or not your home and your family environment is going to be a good environment for children, and more specifically, what types of children will fit you best. Okay? At the same time, step number 6 is a document referred to as a permanency assessment. Permanency assessment looks at what type of a commitment, ultimate commitment, that you want to make to a child. Some people, no offense, they get into foster care with the intention of, hey, I really want to adopt a child. We love that. Other people, no offense, get into foster care with the intention of, you know what, I've raised plenty of children. I am not trying to adopt or raise any more, but I will provide a loving home for kids so long as they're able to stay in my home. I just can't commit to adopting a new child, or I can't commit to taking legal guardianship over a child. A permanency assessment assesses individually what is the ultimate level of permanency that you want to make to a child who potentially is placed in your home. That does not mean that somebody who says I want to adopt is looked at better than somebody who says, hey, I'm wanting to provide a loving home, but I'm not interested in adopting. There is no personal, this person gets a gold star, this person just gets a check. Because at the end of the day, what I'm looking for is, 1, honesty. Secondly, what I'm also looking for is knowing up front, hey, if you ultimately are looking to adopt, then that helps me to know that as I'm placing kids in your home, if I get that call for that child who CPS says they have no relatives and they're looking for a family who potentially might be interested in adopting this child, then guess what? Now I know what families to keep in mind. Because any resource family, upon being approved, depending on your level of permanency, has the ability to say, I'm wanting to potentially adopt this child. So it helps the agency to be aware of and to look out for what the needs of each resource family is based on your identified level of permanency or commitment that you're willing to make to a child. Another step, or component number 7, is referred to as a psychosocial assessment. Now, here's the interesting thing. A psychosocial assessment, first word that you hear in psychosocial assessment is psycho, okay? We are not assessing whether or not you're crazy to an extent, okay? A psychosocial assessment, to be quite honest with you, is an interview, but it's a series of interviews. It's not a one-time thing, okay? So, I'm going to use you guys as an example, if you guys don't mind. I saw you guys walk in together. I'm assuming you're husband and wife, okay? I need to know those things because I don't want to try to hook people up if they aren't. I did that one time where 2 people walked in. I assumed they were a couple. I'm talking to them as though they are a couple, and they're just looking at me like, I don't know him. So I always like to clarify, okay? But you guys are a couple. So when the component 7, when we get to component 7, that psychosocial assessment, one of the things that we like to do is it's a series of interviews. We will meet with you at minimum 3 different times. We're going to meet with you at minimum 3 different times. Will those interviews be conducted at the exact same time? Not always. Because, no offense, we may ask you some questions that your husband may not know about, okay? And I can't tell you, right? At the same time, there may be some information that comes out as part of those interview questions whereby I look and I say, you know what? Maybe you guys need to kind of talk about some things before you make this commitment. The psychosocial assessment asks literally about 135 questions, okay? Which is part of the reason why we break it over a course of at minimum 3 different meetings. But here's also the thing. If you have children or you have anyone else living in your home, a biological parent, relatives, nephews, we will have to interview them a minimum of 1 time. Now, I've said minimums. Minimum for each applicant, 3 times minimum. Minimum for everybody else in the home, minimum 1 time. However, if in interviewing you, things come up or the pace is I need additional insight, I may have to meet more than 3 individual meetings. So the psychosocial assessment is a bunch of interview questions. And that's where we ask questions such as, what type of child are you guys thinking you want to take care of? What age ranges, what ethnicities, what genders? These are the types of questions. We also ask you questions, personal questions about, tell us about your family life. When you were growing up, talk to me about your childhood experiences. When you got married, talk to me about your experiences. She smiled. It was a nice thing. I could already tell. Sometimes you tell me about your marriage and you just, that look just says it all. All right. So the reality is that's why we do the interviews over multiple days. Having said that, once we compile all the notes that are taken from those interviews, we write what is called a comprehensive assessment. Now that comprehensive assessment, which is that big circle in the middle, that comprehensive assessment incorporates information from all of those components, 1 through 7. It incorporates the information we learned from the interview. It incorporates the permanency assessment. It incorporates the risk assessment. All of that information, even those checklists that we did of your home inspection, is talked about in that comprehensive assessment. That comprehensive assessment, make no mistake about it, is about 25 pages long. That's why it takes time. So here's what I will promise you. What I will promise you is that our organization will do what we need to do to get you through the process. However, one of the things that we ask of you is when you know that this is what you want to do, try to commit to all of the steps as they are arranged. We understand everybody's got a life, so circumstances change. However, delays affect the end product of how long it will take to either approve or reject your desire to serve as a resource parent. Now, one of the things I believe in and one of the things that I'm mandated in is to be very upfront with you. So make no mistake about it. When our organization writes that 25-page comprehensive assessment, you get a copy of it. You get to see exactly what we wrote about you. All you have to do is ask for it. The problem is that if we were to finish, and let's say I interviewed you and today was our 3rd meeting and we got it all done, it's gonna be 3 to 4 weeks before I even write that thing, because it's gonna take me that long to get everything together. So understanding that it does take some time, and that's part of the reason why we say 5 steps comprising 8 components, and that's part of the reason why we do the components in certain gaps or break things up so that it's not all done overnight, because guess what? It'll never be done overnight. So how long does this whole process take? That is the magical question that I can rarely answer. And here's the reason being. If you do everything, your clearances come back, you do the classes with no gaps in between, I can tell you that it will typically take our organization about 6 weeks to do your training, and our target goal is within a 90-day period to pretty much have things together. But remember how I said there's 5 steps? Step number 1, orientation and training classes. Step number 2, application. Step number 3, home inspection or home environment assessment. Step number 4, interview. After that step number 4, the interview, the psychosocial assessment and the comprehensive written assessment being completed, when we decide that yes, you're approved, officially you are approved as a resource parent if we approve you at that time. But remember, there's still a step 5, and that step 5 is that the county has to give permission for kids to be placed in your home. That's the process that we have no control over. Because even if we did everything and had the report written today, we then have to send off a bunch of information to the counties that we work with, and they have to review everything and give the okay for children to be placed in your homes. And unfortunately, we don't have any control over how long it takes the counties to give that okay. So even if we approved you today and said you're good to go, we don't know how long it's going to be before the county says you can have kids placed in your home. What I will share with you though is the minute you have the approval of the county for kids to actually be placed in your home, we immediately put you on our vacancy list and are now looking to place kids in your home that meet what has been identified in all of those components as a best match for you. We had one family literally who just got cleared last Thursday. By Friday, they were getting placement calls. By Sunday, they had already had 2 kids placed in their home. And their capacity is 3, and based on the 2 kids that were placed in their home, we made a decision that we're not going to place any more kids in their home because we don't want them getting overwhelmed. So, is it possible for you to get kids placed quickly? Yes, once the county gives the okay that kids can be placed in your home. But a lot of that is dependent upon you and what exactly you are looking for. I will be upfront with you. The more rigid a family is, I want girls, they have to be between 0 to 3 years of age only. They have to have long golden hair. They have to be potty trained. They have to know how to talk, and they have to know how to listen. Well, guess what? That's going to be harder. Okay? Because that's a perfect child. And guess what? In foster care, there's no perfect kids. Does everybody understand that? Okay, so having said that, that is the general process by which it takes to be approved as a resource family. However, one of the things that I want to do is I want to take a 10-minute break. And when we get back off of this break, then I want to start talking about the types of kids that are placed in your home by looking at a video of a call, emergency call. And we're going to talk about this, and then we're going to begin to look at the aspect of trauma. One thing about all kids in foster care, they all have experiences that are traumatic. And as resource parents, you must be understanding of their circumstances. A resource parent versus a foster parent. A resource parent understands that the kids that are going to be placed in your home already are being placed in your home because of trauma that they've experienced in their lives. And a resource parent is prepared to deal with that trauma. I always use the example of what's the difference between a resource parent in 2017 and beyond versus what is the difference with a foster parent prior to 2017. And the difference is that a resource parent has resources that they know within their community that they are prepared to initiate based on the needs of that child. Whereas a foster parent would always wait for a referral to come to them to tell them, go take the child to this psychologist or go take the child to this therapist. A resource parent does not wait for referrals because they already have learned and start the process of learning their community so that they learn where are these different services that children need. Medical doctors, dentists, therapists, types of other providers that may provide services for children that have drug problems or substance abuse problems. They know where to get developmental assessments for kids. That's what a resource parent is prepared to employ. And you'll learn about this through the course of training. So let's do this. That clock is off, I believe, but I am looking at that clock and I'm going to say, let's come back in 10 minutes. Each of you guys look at your own clocks and please come back in 10 minutes because I can already tell that clock is out. And then in 10 minutes, we'll come back, we'll look at a video and we'll talk a little bit about what we heard in that video. And more importantly, we'll have a discussion about the trauma that kids in foster care are experiencing. Okay? I'll see you guys hopefully in 10 minutes. So what we're gonna look at doing now is, now that we have a general overview of the whole resource family approval process, what I'd like to do is go ahead and start off by talking about the types of children that we deal with and kind of giving you guys an understanding of some of the types of problems, emotional, physical, behavioral, that these kids come into care with. So I'm going to share with you a YouTube video that I'm going to let you guys hear, and then afterwards we'll go ahead and talk about. Okay.
September 21st, 1991, time 22:13 hours. This will be a 911 call, position CT07.
Standing emergency. What? Standing emergency.
My mommy and daddy are having a fight.
Is she getting hurt?
What? I'm talking to the police, Mommy. Stop it! Mommy! Stop it! Don't take the baby! Stop it! You're gonna hurt the baby! Stop it! Could you just send the police, please?
Okay, we're going to be there. We're taking your baby.
Stop it! No! Oh!
Let me talk to you. Where's your mom?
What?
What's going on?
They're having a fight because this has been going on forever and ever. They always have this because he has a cousin. He's always drinking beer and getting drunk. And Mom.
What's his name? What is his name? Your father's name?
Pierre.
Pierre?
Yeah.
What's his last name?
I don't know, but I think his
Is he white, black, or Hispanic?
He's black.
He's your father?
He's my stepfather.
Okay, how old is he?
I don't know.
Does he have any weapons?
No. But he's hurting Mommy.
How's he hurting her?
He made his Mommy.
Okay, don't cry. We're going to send the police.
Okay.
Okay, now where's your mother at right now?
She's in the room fighting with them.
Does you have a little baby sister?
No, I got baby brother.
Is he trying to take your baby brother?
Baby.
And he's trying to take your baby?
Yeah, because Mama's not drunk. He thinks he's drunk because he can't say nothing because he's drunk. My stepdaddy's drunk.
Are they in a room fighting? Where are they at now?
They're in the room still.
They're in the bedroom?
Yeah, I don't want him to do nothing strange with the baby because if they drop he's a newborn baby. He's very delicate.
What do you mean do anything strange? What do you think he's going to do to your baby?
I think he's going to take the baby and do something because he's drunk. He might not see the baby and go off without the baby if he takes it.
How old are you?
I'm 6 and my little sister's 4.
You're 6-year-old? You're 6?
Yeah, I'm in first grade. My sister's in kindergarten.
Okay, what is your name? What is your name?
Lisa. My sister's name is Drea. Excuse me.
You only... Okay.
Hmm? Okay, could you just send the police?
Yeah, they're on the way, but I'm going to keep you on the line until they get there, okay? Is your front door open?
Oh, no.
Can you go and lock it and come back to the phone so the officers can get in?
Just wait, please.
Okay.
He just knocked my sister out.
What sister that he knocked out?
My little sister.
Your
The 4-year-old.
What do you mean he knocked her off?
He pushed her down on the floor. And he cried. I wish he was not doing this. Ever since he had him, he can't just slap mommy.
Which room are they in?
My mom's name is Cindy.
Okay, which room are they in?
They're in, that room.
They're in the back room or the bedroom?
The back. Oh my God!
What's the matter?
Something happened! Just wait for the police! Wait, I want to go see what happened, please!
Okay, the police are on their way, okay? Hello? Lisa?
My stepdaddy's got the baby now!
He has the baby now. Where is he at now?
What?
Lisa, where is he at right now? Is he
He's
still in the house?
in the room and got the baby.
Okay.
And he made some red marks on Mama's, on Mama's neck.
He did what?
He made some red marks on Mama's,
Where did he make the red marks on with her
on
neck?
her neck. On the right side. Very dark. Okay, my mom's going outside. Mama, go! The police are coming.
Is your mother? Hello?
When you listen to that, what comes to your mind? What do you feel?
Little girl that was on the phone, she sounds older than 6. Like she's been through a lot of stuff.
So we were, as social workers, we refer to that as she's definitely parentified.
Right.
Okay, she definitely has been through things. Is she protective of her siblings? Okay, at 6 years of age, is she knowledgeable for her age? Is she protective? If she were placed in your home tonight, let's say police arrived, they arrested mom, they arrested dad, or they just took maybe dad, but they took her out of the care and custody of her mother, and she were placed in your home tonight, what types of problems might you think she would present with? Okay. Physical abuse? Maybe emotional abuse? Definitely emotional, verbal, mental. She would have some types of problems, correct? What kind of problems might she have? Okay, anger. At the same time, does she have a right to be angry? Okay. What other problems might she present with, or behaviors? Potentially violent. Can we say that she might be not trusting of everyone? Okay, something to consider. Her stepdad is what race? Black. Okay, so no offense. We can assume potentially that she might not be black. But if she's placed in your home, or she's placed in your home, might she be withdrawn? If she's placed in your home, Might she just connect with you initially, but be a little bit reserved with you? These are the things that we have to understand and recognize, because here's the reality. Every child in foster care has a story like hers. This is what we don't understand, because when we are a resource parent, what we get is a phone call, and in that phone call, we are told information about a child. Based on that information, we then make the decision, do we want to accept this child or not? If we knew Lisa's circumstance, as it's explained in that video, and we were called for placement of Lisa, raise your hand if you would be willing to accept her into your home. Okay? By all means. At the same time, if they called and said, we want to place Lisa and her 4-year-old sibling, if you had room in your home, would you accept Lisa and her 4-year-old sibling? Knowing the circumstance. If they called and said, we want to place Lisa age 6, her sibling age 4, and the baby who's a newborn, and you had room in your home, how many of us would accept all 3 kids? If we don't understand these kids' stories, that's where it's easy to say no. If we hear a story like that, would we not want to try to help Lisa? Just by hearing that story. Every kid that's going to be referred to you for placement has a story like that. This is the challenge that you will face as a resource parent or a resource family. Recognizing that every child referred to you has a story that you will not know. You will get information, you will hear some things about a child, but you will not hear their story. But if you were to hear their story, chances are you try to help every kid that was referred to you. What's one thing that Lisa's experiencing? What would you say? What is something that she's experiencing or going through? I'm going to give you a hint. Trauma. Is it fair enough to say that she's going through trauma? This is why one of the foundations of resource family approval, or the RFA process, focused in on changing how you understand and work with these kids. Every kid in foster care is going through and dealing with trauma. They are placed in our homes because something happened in their own homes that resulted in them being pulled from those environments that are normal to them to be placed in a stranger's home called a resource family, because they're dealing with trauma. One of the core foundations of your learning is to understand, and one thing that you will hear a lot of is the notion of understanding the trauma that these kids are dealing with and being prepared to work with them, even when they are experiencing that trauma. That is why a resource parent learns their community, learns what resources are available in their communities, so that when these kids are placed, you're not waiting on a referral to get them enrolled in whatever services are needed. You are already initiating those services so that you can help these kids deal with that underlying trauma. This is the seriousness of your job. And no offense, you cannot take being a resource parent lightly. Because as happy as you will be when you are fully approved to take care of a child, you will be ecstatic, ready to save the world. That first placement, you'll always remember. Guarantee you, your first placement, you will remember. Why? Because your smile is going to be bigger than life. Your arms are going to be outstretched wider than they've ever been, because that first child that comes to your home, you are going to want to do everything you can to save, protect, and rescue that child, because this is my opportunity to help a child. And this is what I worked so hard to get approved to do. And yet you're going to be, how you doing? Give me a hug. I want to help you. Are you hungry? You're going to have food ready, the best food you've ever had. And that kid is going to come into your home and be afraid. Because what are you to that child? Stranger. Even though you are officially approved as a resource family or a resource parent to that child, you are a stranger. They've already been dealing with trauma. Whatever led to them being pulled from their family and put in your care, that traumatic event is what they are remembering. But compounding that, they're now living with a stranger. And that is what you are going to have to deal with. So if Lisa were placed in your home, knowing her background, knowing the trauma that she's experiencing, knowing what she's dealing with and going through, how do you try to help Lisa when she's first placed into your home? What would you do?
Try to just give her confidence.
Okay.
That, you're safe.
Okay. Assure her that she's safe. Give her some comfort. Try to give her that attention. What would you do?
I would take it slow, not trying to rush, if she acts out or something, you're not going to want to get mad right off the...
By all means, give her her time to fill out what being in your home is about. Give her that attention, but also not try to throw everything, hey, we got to get everything my way or the highway right now. How would you guys try to help her?
Paying attention to her. It's hard. I don't know really.
Absolutely.
I don't know where to even start.
Because there's no perfect answer. But this is what you have to think about. Because here's the reality. We can role play everything we can. There's going to come a time, if you're approved as a resource parent, where this becomes a reality. And you started it off by saying exactly what I wanted to hear. Listening and giving her time and trying to figure out what she's about. One of the first things that all resource parents need to have, patience. You got to have patience. You cannot turn around. You'll have a job to do, and as part of this training class, you're going to be told certain things that you are going to have to do. But the one thing you have to do is have patience. To recognize that it is not always about your time. Sometimes it's about just allowing these kids to have their time. Because she's going to come in, she's parentified, meaning when you start talking about or feeding her infant baby, she may tell you, no, that's the wrong way. And you can't take offense to it. When you're talking to her 4-year-old sibling and you're trying to get her 4-year-old to do certain things, she may tell you, no, that's not how you do it. And you have to let her have that ability to adjust, to assure her, you know what, how do you do it? But you can still be a kid. And part of our job is to make sure you're safe and your siblings are safe, but we get it. This is your sister. This is your brother. So, first task, if you don't have patience, figure it out, because you're going to have to. Kids in foster care, they're dealing with a lot. And it was just compounded by the fact that they were now placed in your home that they didn't request. Oftentimes they don't know, and they have no idea initially when they are going to see their family members. And these are the things that we're going to learn over the course of the next 6 weeks. Do you guys have any questions? So, in your packet, you will see that you have a PowerPoint presentation that talks about the effects of trauma. And so one of the things that I will say to you, and it should be at the back of yours, it should be a black and white version. Does everybody see it? Okay, I want to make sure everybody has one. Keep going, yeah. Keep going back. Kind of towards the back. Yeah, all right. And James, do you have yours? You see yours? I would say go to the very last page and then pull back like 4 or 5 pages. Okay.
Yeah,
That's it. So it's black and white version. Yeah, no, I get the nice color version. You guys got the black and white versions. So I apologize about that. So one of the things that you're gonna learn, and we literally will start talking much more about trauma and the effects of trauma. But in an orientation class, I'm not trying to overwhelm you. But what I am trying to get you to understand is where training classes will start to go. So one of the things that I'm encouraging you guys to do is start to look at the different materials that you get. You will learn that trauma affects everyone. It will affect you because you'll have an emotional reaction to some of the stories and circumstances of these kids. You will get emotionally attached to these kids. No offense. A resource family that doesn't get bonded or attached to kids in their home shouldn't be doing this. Because the reality is that you are taking care of somebody else's child, bringing them into your fold, trying to acclimate them to your family, getting them bonded to your family, and hoping that at the end of the day, regardless of if they stay there forever, if you adopt them, or they go home, hoping that by the time they do leave your home, they've learned and picked up new things that will help them in whatever they choose to do later in life. This is not a field that you get pats on the back. This is a field that you do because you have it in here and you have it here. And my challenge to you is the best resource families learn right off how the circumstances of these kids, even when we don't hear them as vividly as explained in this video, we understand that when a child is referred to our homes, they have a background similar to that. It may not be fighting and domestic violence. It might be sexual abuse. It may be emotional abuse. It may be some type of neglect. But every kid that is going to be referred to your home, your home, your home, your home, has a story, and that story centers around understanding that that child is dealing with a traumatic experience or a history of traumatic experiences. And so, just briefly, I want to point out a couple of things. I'm not going to go through the whole slide, but I do want to point out a couple of things to leave you guys with. One, realize and understand trauma is a wound, hurt, or injury. It could be or include physical stress, including abuse or neglect, or some type of emotional or psychological abuse or neglect. There's different types of, or two main types of trauma. There's single traumatic event, which is a one-time event, or some type of compounded traumatic experience or event, which is multiple or many events that are compounded. Having said that, realize and understand that Trauma does have certain effects on kids. Those effects include emotional and psychological effects. It also has behavioral effects that affect their attachment or a child's attachment to you. And there are certain things that we can do to help or prevent the traumatic experiences that these children experience from becoming too problematic. At the root, this is a job of commitment. It's a job of understanding that you cannot save every child, but every child that comes to your home, you can teach a little nugget of information that will help them later on. And that is your goal. It is not to save the world. It is not to save every child that comes to your home, but it is to make sure that every child that comes through your home learns something that they can take with them, that they can incorporate, so that whatever trauma they're dealing with is a little bit less. That's what a resource parent understands. You can't save and fix everything. What you can do is give that child or those children an experience that makes them think differently about you. That's your challenge as a resource parent. So I want to end this by asking two questions. First, the question is, does anybody have any other questions for me? Okay. Second, and this question you can answer just by raising your hand. Raise your hand if you learned something more than when you first walked in here. Then I've done my job. And hopefully, I will see you tomorrow for our first training class, where we will talk about how these kids actually enter into the foster care system through Child Protective Services, or they enter into placement via the probation departments. And we'll talk about those systems and how kids are interacting with probation and Child Protective Services and you. Other than that, you guys have a nice day. Thank you guys for showing up. I appreciate you guys for coming. All right.